Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us on this next episode of our LinkedIn Live. My name is Justyna Brownbridge, and I am the Chief of Growth for Tribal Impact. And I have absolute pleasure to have with me today Dana DiTomaso, the global expert in digital analytics and, in fact, quite a lot of things relating to digital marketing. Dana, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
For those of you who don't know Dana, would you mind giving us a little bit more of an introduction about what it is that you do? And I like to ask this question, why you do what you do?
Yeah, that's a great
Simple
question.
question to start with.
Sure. So I am president of Kickpoint, which is a digital marketing agency. I'm also founder and lead instructor at Kickpoint Playbook, which is a education platform for digital marketers with courses right now in analytics, but we have lots more coming as well. My background, I've been working in this field for 25 years now. I started freelancing, building websites back in 2000, back in the dark ages. And I actually am a much better SEO than a website builder. So I did SEO for a very long time. And then around 2016, 2017, clients started saying, we need to focus on results. We need to see the results of this. And so then I started getting into analytics. And that was really interesting to me. And it started to take up more and more of my time. And then GA4 happened. And then I became a GA4 expert. So it's just, why do I become a GA4 expert? It's funny. People ask me, do you like GA4? I'm like, well, do I? But I think it's a matter of, it's an important measurement tool. It's a critical tool if you're using, say, Google Ads. And what I really like doing is taking complicated things and explaining them to other people. And I also really like figuring out new ways to solve problems. So both of those things lend themselves very well to working in the world of GA4 right now.
Fantastic. And that is exactly what we're here to talk about today, right? So how
Mm-hmm.
do you measure the success of marketing campaigns, B2B marketing campaigns? Because quite a lot of things have changed from those early days, yes, when we all
Yep.
got excited a lot, because I was there as well, about Google
Mm-hmm.
Analytics and the amount of data that it's able to give you about every single visitor, or it used to be able to do that, right? About
Yeah, I was
every
gonna say
single
those
visitor.
days are long gone. Yeah.
Yes, I still remember them and go, oh,
Yep.
what happened? What happened? And
Mm-hmm.
this is really where we are today, right? So
Mm-hmm.
in quite a lot of situations, I still hear of people focusing a lot on um, the traffic, yes, as the main
Yep.
measurements to their website and figuring out, oh, why has it dropped? What's happening? What's going on with
Yep.
this channel? So there's quite a lot of challenges with this at the moment, and I would love for us, before we dive deeper into this subject, to define the challenge. And you are great at this. I've watched
Mm-hmm.
your presentation overview from MosCon from last year.
Yep.
What is the challenge right now with the digital analytics?
Yeah, the big challenge, there's really a couple different fronts for the big challenge. Now, you are obviously in the UK and Europe, European Union, you have different privacy laws than, say, someone in Texas does, for example, which is where one of our bigger clients is based. In Texas, you can track everything. You don't need to worry about those pesky privacy laws, right? But in the European Union, or specifically in the European Economic Area, people can say no to being tracked. And that has been one of the big, when GDPR first came out, I remember there was a last minute panic of like, oh, I guess I need to have a cookie banner now. And there was lots of, I don't know how to implement this. And some people would say, well, you can't view the website if you don't say yes to cookies. And they're like, actually, no, you can't do that. And so over time, I think the cookie standards in terms of dialogues have become a bit more standardized, but there's still like a lot of different cookie dialogues out there. And there's also a lot of different experiences. So for example, I live in Canada on the West Coast, so I usually don't see a ton of cookie dialogues necessarily because it isn't required for me in the province that I live in. But when I was in Munich not too long ago for SMX Munich, all these sites that I had been to previously suddenly were asking for consent. It's like, oh, now you want to double check. And even apps that I've been using for months, all of a sudden were like, hey, are you okay to consent with this? Because I changed my location. So I think that the experience does really vary based on where you're physically located. And I think people, if you don't necessarily travel a lot for work, you may not realize like the differences in experience in terms of how people say yes or no to being tracked. And so, depending upon what kind of business you're in, your default may be you always hit no to cookies. Or your default might be like, oh, I guess I'll let these people track me. You might think about it and say, yes to these people, no to these other people. Or you always say yes and you don't care. And so really that depends on, your own personal preferences. But I mean, I've seen from our European clients anywhere from 40% to 80% of people say no to being tracked. So that means that we're only tracking, 60 to 20% of the overall traffic coming into a website. So that's the first big problem. And then the second problem are things like ad blockers. Google Chrome recently made a change that was going to fix the ad blocker problem, but the ad blockers, of course, came back with something new. You can still use an ad blocker. You can still block being tracked. And so, on top of people saying no to tracking, there's also ad blockers. And depending upon how you've implemented your cookie tracking, the ad blocker might just block the cookie tracking from coming up entirely. Those people just don't exist as far as, anything is concerned. Because some cookie products, for example, I use CookieBot most of the time on our clients' websites. That's my preferred tool of choice. It actually tells you in the admin how many people said yes and how many people said no. So you can look at your analytics and say, well, about 50% of people said no. So what we have in GA4 is probably about half of the actual traffic that came to the website. But then there's this other, say 20% of people use ad blockers who just don't show up at all. They never see a cookie dialog because they're not allowing any tracking at all. So they never say yes or no to tracking. They just disappear as far as we're concerned. So because of that, realistically, you're probably tracking, even if you don't have consent requirements, you're probably only tracking maybe 70% of the visitors that you used to, just generally. And then if you do have consent requirements, that could be cut down as much as down to like 20% of the traffic you used to be able to track. And so that's kind of sad for sure. And so a lot of people focus on, well, what can I do to get around this? Well, you can use something called server-side tracking, which helps with ad blockers, but you still have to not track people if they say no to being tracked. And then when GA4 came out, they had this thing called cookieless, and Matomo does this as well, where they say, well, we'll just, send data off, but it won't be identifiable to an individual person. And the problem with that data is that every single page view is divorced from every other page view in a session. So it just looks like you have this whole bunch of direct traffic that just lands on one specific page and then takes off. So as far as I'm concerned, cookieless traffic is actually kind of useless. So I really prefer just track the heck out of the people who said yes to being tracked and then just accept the people you can't track. But explaining that to leadership is really difficult because they're used to seeing numbers and the numbers are going down. And knows our business, going down. Well, you're getting the same amount of leads or more. So no, business is fine, but this traffic is down, and traffic has just been this thing that we've relied on, especially in SEO, for so many years to prove our value. So now I think SEO is really scrambling and saying, well, how can I possibly prove my value now if there's less traffic? So that's kind of the situation that we're in at the moment.
So just to pause there for a second, so you said that in some cases it could be that we are tracking just 20%, or we are seeing within the digital analytics tools just 20% of the actual traffic that is coming to our website.
Yep, absolutely. I've even seen one case where 90% of people said no to being tracked. So it was like 10% actually made it to GA4 if you didn't turn on modeling, which would show you the cookieless traffic.
Okay, wow. So going from there, right? So we've got this challenge of not being able to see all the traffic.
Yep.
Not being able to, I'm just thinking of the other challenge, attribution. Are we able to attribute this traffic correctly? Even the one that we can see, right? So let's say this 20%. Are we able to attribute it correctly to the sources from where it came?
In most cases you can, but the problem is that people do all sorts of crazy stuff with attribution, right? So you can, add UTM links to, you add UTM parameters to your URL. People have probably seen these, like UTM source, UTM medium, etc. And what will happen is some pesky marketer like myself will remove those before sending the link to a friend or visiting another website, right? So that gets rid of UTMs. I mean, I would say that's kind of an edge case that those of us as marketers, we know what those UTMs do. Sometimes people remove them. It's very funny when people joke about it, but I'm like, no, don't remove those. Those are important. But, here's an anecdotal example from myself. We sell courses to marketers. Only half of people who come to our website who do allow tracking, because we do have a lot of European visitors, but half the people who do allow tracking probably have an ad blocker because I only actually see half of our sales show up in GA4. So that means that there's this other 50% that just are saying no to being tracked, or they have an ad blocker. You can't hide that you made a purchase because I can still see the purchase come in, but you can hide how you got there, what pages you landed on, etc. And so that makes it really difficult when it comes to attribution because really we're kind of making decisions based on only half the data. And that half the data might just be, say, North Americans who don't use ad blockers. So that's where it can get really, really difficult. So yeah, I think that this is where, what was I talking about? Right. Being able to track these people. And so as a B2B business, like you don't necessarily know where people have come from. And so attribution does kind of go out the window a little bit. And B2B has always been a particularly difficult attribution space anyway, because people do all sorts of crazy things before they buy, right? Like the person who gets in touch with you may not be the person who first came across your product, because B2B has RFPs and, oh good, it's perfect now. Great. Thanks, Natalia. Because B2B has things like RFPs, and they have committees, and they have, lots of people checking out a demo before they decide that they're going to go ahead and have a sales call, right? And so that introduces an extra layer of complexity. And so there's all these marketing automation platforms like HubSpot and Marketo and stuff who are like, yeah, we're going to tie people together. We're going to use things like, I try to remember, it's like Zoom Info and those kinds of things. They're like, we can track which company it is. But again, only if they let you. So again, you're only recapturing that tiny bit of data. And I think we are wasting time by spinning our wheels trying to recapture that data that people have said no to being tracked. And instead, I think we should just focus on what we can actually track and just, stop trying to get this stuff back. Because really, it's like you're in the buggy whip industry and cars have just come out, like stop fighting against it and saying, you have to force everybody to buy a buggy whip. Like, no, maybe you should open a car factory instead.
Right. So challenge, right? There's quite a lot of things happening here, right? We've got cookies issues. We've got ad blockers that a lot of people are starting to use. We've got differences in terms of regions. Yes, how many people are showing these kind of behaviors. And then there's all of the attribution situation in terms of, complex buyer journeys, multi-devices, etc., how people are researching, completing their purchases, etc. Okay, so as you said, focus on what you can actually track. So my question is, what can we track, and how can we then, of course, right? That's my next question. And then it goes deeper, right? Because the big thing is we track things also because we want to showcase, well, first we need to understand ourselves, yes, what works, what doesn't, but also demonstrate that into our leadership teams, right? Because our budgets depend on it. So starting with that big question, what we can actually track, what would you say there using digital analytics tools?
Yeah, I would say sometimes I almost sidestep the analytics tools themselves. So one of the metrics that I've introduced into our reports over the past few years, which has actually been quite successful with clients, is a metric. And I talk about this, there's a post on my website, which we can, I can toss in the links to this. It's called Marketing Analytics is Wrong. Can it be fixed? The answer is, spoiler alert, no, it can't be fixed. But it's something I wrote after that MozCon talk. And one of the things that I talk about there is this metric called effectiveness. And so effectiveness can really be two metrics divided by each other. And you pick a top level metric. So for example, impressions in search, impressions in paid, impressions in, say, social media, maybe the number of people you have on your email list. You combine all that together into a metric. And then you divide that by your bottom level metric, whether that be sales, leads, you pick marketing qualified leads, like you pick what that final metric is most important to you. And then you get a percentage number. And so what you're looking for is like, is that percentage going up, down, or staying flat over time? If it's going up, then your marketing is getting more effective. The more eyeballs you reach, you're proportionally turning over a higher percentage of those people into what you want, which is a sale or a lead or whatever. If it's staying flat, then you're being just as effective. And if it's going down, that means you're getting more eyeballs in your stuff, but less people proportionally are getting in touch. And I think that that is one really nice top level metric that a C-suite can look at and be like, oh, I can see immediately what's going on, period. There's no attribution involved because all you're looking at is the input of all the impressions across all different platforms. And you could even break it down too. And you could say, you know what, I'm just going to look at Google Search Console and combine that by leads, for example. I'm just going to look at Google Ads impressions and look at leads, for example. It's what you put into it is really up to you. But it's the idea that there is a relationship between impressions and conversions, however you define a conversion. And so you're sidestepping the attribution and saying, what is this ratio? Is it staying fixed? Is it going up? Is it going down? And because it is just one single, thanks Ryan for linking the article on LinkedIn there. So check the comments for the article. But one of the things that you really want to look at is, what is one thing that I can present to the C-suite that is simple to understand, one single metric that they can look at. It's a nice little graph. You can I usually put a trend line over it so they can see how it's changing over time, because it can be kind of spiky, especially if you have any seasonality in your business or any sort of, big press releases. So I worked with one company who they had a huge press release that got a lot of attention. And even though they sell to huge businesses, the product that they mentioned got a lot of press and just like the regular general press. And so all of a sudden their impressions were all over the place, right? And so it looked like it was pretty bad for a little bit, but then it caught up again, because it's like, okay, now the press has died down. Now we're back onto actual people who can afford and will buy their product, which costs millions and millions of dollars, right? So I think it's a matter of, this can kind of smooth out the irregularities that you'd see over time. Because thinking about that client who got a lot of press mentions, it was so funny, because I was doing a GA4 audit for them, and I started on the audit the day that they got all the press mentions, and you could just see their traffic just go right up a cliff. And I was like, well, today's not a good day to do a GA4 audit, because they're going to have a lot of weird stuff showing up in here, right? And then it lasted about a week, and then it went back down again. But then when they compare year over year traffic, they're going to have this weird little spike because of this media mention, And so I think that doing something like effectiveness can really help to sort of smooth out those spikes, especially if you report on it not on a day-by-day basis, but on a week-by-week, or ideally I report on a month-by-month basis. It kind of levels out all those bumps that you might find from various different media mentions, especially if you're in a company that has like any sort of public scrutiny, that is... might have a B2B and a B2C component. For example, we work with Expedia Group, who is, you know them for booking B2C flights and hotels, but we work with them on the B2B side, Escapia, which is their actual corporate travel booking software, right? And so sometimes they get mentioned along with other stuff, but sometimes they don't. And so again, it's like a very weird, spiky sort of thing. So we just look at Google Ads impressions and combine that with leads, for example, because that's a little bit smoother than looking at, say, their Google Search Console impressions. So I think it's up to you to decide what those two inputs are, like the top level metric and the bottom level metric. But the reality is, showing one chart to the C level that encapsulates everything and doesn't have a lot of big numbers on it, but it just shows trend over time, can be a really effective way to get your point across.
Okay, perfect. So you call this metric effectiveness.
I do. Yeah. And I thought about all sorts of, I used to call it efficiency, I think. And I think effectiveness, it's an awkward word, but I think it gets the point across.
Okay. Brilliant. That's a great idea. I've never heard that before, right? But it's so important as well, to think about these impressions, right? Because at the end of the day, impressions is eyeballs on your content, right? I mean, you don't know, it's the brand reach. Yes. It's how, it might not tell you exactly how many people, but it tells you how many views specific types of activity had in comparison to maybe some other things. So I like that idea, because at the end of the day, if people don't see your brand, right? If people don't get exposed to your brand, then they're not going to know who you are. They're not going to know what it is that you offer. But if the only way how you are or have been, how you have been tracking the effectiveness of your campaigns, or the first way how you were tracking the effectiveness of your campaigns was traffic, and we know now that 20%, it could be, or in some cases even just 10% of your traffic you were actually able to track, then you could be getting a very, very distorted view in terms of the effectiveness or even the reach of your cross-media campaigns.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think too, like how we report as marketers, I think we've always relied on this accuracy, which has been like, this hasn't been accurate for a very long time. Like ad blockers have been around for a long time now. We haven't had accurate data in a long time, but we always sort of relied on this illusion of accuracy. So we would present numbers as whole numbers, even though, the reality is like, they're not actually that accurate. So if you're looking at, say, comparing year over year data, you would say, oh, our traffic is up 26.23%. It's a year of data. Is it really 0.23? Is it just like 26? Or is it maybe you just want to round that up even more and say 30 or 25, Like, how do you want to present that to someone? And so I always say, like, less decimal points, less illusion of precision, because we don't actually know how precise it is. And are you truly going to make a different decision based on it being 26.23 versus 26? Probably not. So why even show those extra decimal points, right? Because a lot too, when we're thinking about presenting, especially to the C-level on these reports, really you have to think about like their mental load as well. You are just one thing in their entire day of all the different things that they have to think about. And the last thing that they want to do is like pat you on the head and say, yes, you did a very cool job with your marketing. Good job, right? Like they just want to know, like, are we going out of business? Are things trending in the right direction? Is there something that I need to be worried about? Or am I like, great, you're doing a good job. Cool. We can move on to the next thing that I do actually need to be worried about. And so how you present that data is really critically important. And that's the difference between continuing to work with a client if you're agency side, continuing to, get raises if you're in-house. And it's not just about proving, well, SEO brought 36 leads in last month. It's more, here's SEO's contribution to the greater whole of the business in terms of going forward. And I feel like we've almost come entirely full circle when it comes to attribution. When, if you think back to pre-internet where it was, spray and pray, where you just like put out some billboards and hope somebody got in touch with you, it almost feels like we're back there again. Right? It's like we had this golden moment of attribution, which has now been ripped away from us because we, as marketers, we always abuse our toys and we track people too much. And now this is what's happened. And the other part of it too is that branding, especially from an AI overview and AI perspective, has become almost more critical than it used to be, And so, for example, when all the panic started to go out about zero-click search results, I mean, something that I always felt about it, and this is because I started working in local SEO before I moved into like mainstream SEO. And sorry, I have a cat. He's probably going to make an appearance at some point. He's circling around right now. If you hear him,
I could just hear him, right? And is that the cat that you just adopted?
We just got him last week. Yeah. So he's still getting used to
There you
me
go.
actually working during the day. Yeah. Oh, he's left now. So maybe he'll make an appearance later. Anyway, so
Brilliant.
Thinking about it from a local SEO perspective, I don't care if somebody Google's, dumpster rental near me or bin rental near me, and then picks up the phone and calls because they see the phone number on the Google listing. There's no attribution there necessarily unless you're using a call tracking number. I don't care. They still got in touch with my client. Ultimately, I do not care how that happened, right? So the same thing is true when it comes to this B2B marketing. Like, ultimately, if somebody saw a zero-click search result, so they Googled something, they got an AI overview that came up, they saw the brand in the sidebar, right? They Googled something else, the same brand came up again and again and again. And over time, people start to remember that brand. And so when they ultimately are like, okay, we're picking our last candidates for this. All right, so this company has been coming up a lot in these searches. I think they know what they're talking about because I see them all the time coming up, even though I may never have actually clicked through their website at this point. Maybe I've just seen them come up in like 5 or 10 AI overviews or organic searches. It doesn't matter because that brand is still there. And I almost feel like, really this AI stuff is really focusing on to go back to the idea of brand building. Like, what do we talk about? What do we stand for? And why should someone choose us as a company? So I think that's a really critical thing that we kind of got away from when we're thinking about keywords and everything else and like ranking for these important non-branded keywords. Like one thing I always report on is the percentage of branded versus non-branded I see in Google Search Console. And Google Search Console is not 100% accurate either. Like, just get that out there. But again, when we're thinking about directionality and trends, are we seeing directionally more branded traffic or less over time as a percentage of the total? And then that can tell us, are we moving in the right direction in terms of more people being aware of us as an organization?
So this is really interesting point that you made in here. I mean, there's so many points that you made in here. My gosh, right? So in the era of AI, right, we need to focus more on brand rather than technical optimization, right? If I could summarize it like that, that we focus on.
Yeah,
quite
I mean,
a
I
lot
still
in the
think technical optimization is important, but I think don't get too hung up on like, oh, well, I'm just showing up AI overviews. Oh, well, like that is an important branding opportunity. And I think it's really critical to like know when you are showing up in those AI overviews. So use a rank tracking tool that tracks that stuff as well. I did also just publish an article on my website about how to track if people come to your website via AI overviews as well. So I'd recommend implementing that in Google Tag Manager. It sounds complicated. It's not. It's about, I record a step-by-step video. It took me 8 minutes, so you can do it too. Exactly how to track if people come to your website via those search features. Because again, if some of the people will click, at least then you're showing up for those particular search features. And I think it's really important to track as well. And again, like I wouldn't necessarily report to management, like here's a list of all the different things that people clicked on that showed a AI overview. That's not important to them. They don't actually care, but they might want to know how many times you showed up in an AI overview. They might want to know, what percentage of overall search results are showing an AI overview. Is that increasing over time? And what does that mean? So it isn't just presenting the number, because the number, a tool can give you that number. An AI tool can give you that number. Your job as a marketer is to present the insight. So here's the number. We showed up and we have 20% more search results that show AI overviews based on what we're seeing in SEMrush or Ahrefs or whatever rank tracking tool you use. Stat is another good one, for example. And what does that mean? What do we need to do as a result of this? Should we expect to see less traffic coming through to our website? Is that good or bad? What do we expect to see the long-term impacts of this? And sometimes a good answer is we don't know because this is really new. This is what we think right now, but I want to get back to you next month as we start to investigate this more. Or here's what the industry is saying about this too. Like that's also a totally acceptable answer. And I actually just had Alita Solis on my own LinkedIn Live. We have a recap post about that on our website as well, where she talked about brand and AIO and what to watch out for. So listen to experts out there and incorporate some of those details into what you're telling CEOs as well, because they just want to know, like, are you actually paying attention to what's happening? And are you actually keeping up with what's going on in the industry?
I think that is what Tim is referring to as well, right? He's saying, I always
Mm-hmm.
worry about providing data to management. I try to present insights and suggestions rather than just
Yep.
data. How would you suggest data is presented in recommendations for senior management, right? So you've covered
Yeah.
that a lot in here in your last
Yeah, and I would
answer.
say too, like when you do need to present data, keep it super simple and use the words that management is using. So if management is saying, I want to know how much the phone rings, like don't say, here are phone call conversions from, this period, like talk about, here's how many times your phone rang, and that's often I will include that kind of, and especially if it's a report that I'm not presenting, it's something where they can look at it whenever they want. I will try to make the language as simple as possible, and I include lots of what I call micro copy, where I'm just presenting, like I'll write out a whole bunch of explanation on exactly what it is that they're looking at. I'll bold important words or put highlights behind them, just so they can take their big takeaway on that. And I also use a lot of, and there's an example of that in the post that Ryan linked to in the comments, where I'll have a pie donut chart combination. I need to come up with a name for this, but what it is it's two overlaid a pie chart with a donut chart around it in Looker Studio. So it's actually two chart elements overlaid on top of each other. The inner pie is usually, let's say, conversions by device, for example. And the outer donut will be sessions by device. And so really we're just looking at, do the slices match up? Does the percentage of people coming to the website via mobile who've consented to tracking also correspond with the people who converted on mobile who consented to tracking? I'm not showing any numbers in this chart. I'm just saying, do the slices line up? And we've used this chart to prove to someone, hey, your website sucks hard on mobile. We should probably redo your website. It's like nobody's converting on mobile. This is not good. But you also need to reflect, what kind of people visit your website as well. For example, on our website, because it's most people who are marketers sitting at their desks all day, we have a lot of desktop traffic. We have very little mobile traffic. The mobile traffic who does come to us is not likely to take a course. People do that on their laptop or desktop computer. And so we don't necessarily see a lot of sign-ins on mobile. We see a lot of people who are reading our articles on mobile. So because of that, there's certain things that we know about that audience. And if you know that information, include that as well. But the reality is, like, try to dial it back as much as possible. Just show really simple stuff. This is not a time for you to look like you're really cool and with numbers and look at this neat visualization and stuff. Like, keep it as simple as possible. Keep it as just like lots of white space. Don't clutter it. We don't want a Star Trek style dashboard with like 18 different modules all flashing at us at the same time, right? You just want to dial it back and assume it will be printed as well. Don't require any sort of mouse overs or any kind of elements like that. Assume at some point someone's going to print it and put it on someone's desk or slap it into a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, hi. So Rufus has made an appearance, by the way. Come here.
Brilliant.
Yeah, so this is Rufus, everybody. He doesn't like
Hi,
being picked up
Rufus.
just yet. Come on. There you go.
He hasn't got the opinion yet about tracking data or reporting
No,
on
he
it, so
hasn't
I
learned
can
enough
imagine.
about GA4 yet. Yeah, he'll get there.
Yet. There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
He's your cat, right? At the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Lots of practical tips, right? What to
Mm-hmm.
report on, how to provide not just data but insights, yes, and give your leadership team maybe not exact answers, but also, I guess, the confidence that you are staying on top of the changes that are happening, the trends that are happening, and you may not know the answer yet, but you're working on figuring this out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's where, like, even telling someone that you don't know but you're working on it is an okay thing to say. And I think this is where, especially people who are newer in their careers, are like, oh, I don't want to admit that I don't know the answer. Like, that's okay to do at some point, because you also don't want to say lie and then you get caught out in it. That is worse. So
Hmm.
make sure that you're being quite honest and just telling people when you don't know, or this is new, or this is what we suspect is happening, for example. So one of the things we've been talking to our clients about, especially with regards to them showing up in AIO reviews, is like, here's the kinds of things, this is not a webinar about AI overviews, so I'm not going to go into the exact reasons, but here are the things that we think help a brand show up in AI overviews. So based on this information, these are the things that we're going to try. But we also, this is still just a very small percentage of overall traffic, so we're not devoting a lot of time to it just yet, but it's something we can't ignore because we are seeing this growth in organic traffic coming to your website over time. So like that's a good way to present it as well, so that because obviously AI is the big hype right now. Everybody's talking about it. Shopify came out with this whole AI thing yesterday that everyone's paying attention to. And I'm in Canada, so obviously anything Shopify does, all Canadians pay attention to it at all times. So yeah, obviously you got to talk about it because it is such a hot topic right now with CEOs. But remember too how voice search was such a hot topic when that first came out, and people have kind of forgotten about voice search over time. There will be something new. I think AI is going to obviously completely revolutionize our industry and how we do things, but also have some perspective on it as well. And really this is a great opportunity as well to start to say like, hey, this can help us figure out like where our clients are actually hanging out. We know that, for example, using a tool like SparkToro, which if you haven't used SparkToro, it's a fantastic audience research tool made by Rand Fishkin, formerly of Moz. And what I like about SparkToro is you can put in a job title, for example, online marketing manager, which is a common job title of people who come to our webinars. And it will tell me all the websites and podcasts and social accounts that audience pays attention to. And then, even though you might think, well, I'm in SEO or I'm in PPC, this is kind of out of my lane, those kinds of things tell you, where should we get links from? Where should we be putting ads on, right? Is there a podcast that we can sponsor, or do we need to get our, CEO on this podcast so that they're talking to the right audience? And those are the kinds of things that, CEOs really do consider to be more out of the box thinking. That is something that can really help you, again, continue to work with that client agency side, or get promotions, get raises if you're in-house as well. So don't just stay in your lane, stay up on the stuff, listen to what the experts are saying, pick a few experts you trust. Don't fall into the hype trains. There's lots of, marketing bros on YouTube who will be like, this one weird trick, blah, blah, blah. Like don't follow down that particular trap. But there are certainly a lot of things that you can be doing that might feel out of your lane right now. But ultimately, we're all in marketing, and marketing is getting more eyeballs on our stuff. So why not try these things?
And you've got such a great point in that. SparkToro, I've used SparkToro as well.
Yeah, it's so good.
You know me, I digest everything that Rand Fishkin publishes moments after he publishes this. And there's one thing that he said about the audience research, that we, or the role as marketers, yes, we need to be where our audience is when they are researching the solutions to the challenges that they have, right? So I'm thinking out loud now in here that one way of assessing the effectiveness of our campaigns is, are we showing up in the places where our audience is, right?
Yep.
And if we know
SEO
where
is
they are,
just one part of that, right? Like Google is not necessarily the only place that somebody's going to go to when they're getting an answer. At some point, they're going to click on a search result that isn't you, or at this point, they're just top of funnel and they're looking for roundups. They're looking for discussion points. They're looking for which tool is right for me. They're not ready to go to the individual B2B provider's website yet, right? And so I think really starting to think more up funnel will also really benefit the kinds of things that, as a marketer, you really need to think about, which is showing up well. And SEOs, put your link building hat on. These are great link building opportunities as well. So if there's something that you can do to show up there, do it for sure.
This makes me think and correct me if I'm wrong in here, you build in also a case here for multi-channel marketing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always have been, honestly. I think that people can get really, narrow in their silos and everything. And I think there's a great concept called the T-shaped marketer. And the idea of, as an SEO, you know a little bit about everything in SEO, but then you get really focused in, say, just content marketing, for example, or just technical SEO. And I think that as marketers, we should know a little bit about everything that can possibly happen in SEO, social, PPC, SEO, all these different websites as well, and just know a little bit about all of it so that you're able to also say, hey, you know what, I think that this is actually a great opportunity for, and that will give you the ability to see those opportunities, which you wouldn't necessarily be able to see otherwise.
Fantastic tips. Dana, this is fascinating. There's so much more that I could ask you about. I wanted to give a chance for our audience to see if there's any other questions that they may have on this subject. We still got a few minutes. For me, I've just got one question, which I always like to ask at the end.
Yeah.
what is it that we haven't covered that I should have really asked you about and I
Mm-mm.
haven't? Simple
That
question
is a
again. There you go.
good question. Yeah. I would say right now is a really weird time in marketing. I obviously have been working in this field for a while. I remember what happened in 2008 when everybody cut back on their marketing, and it was a difficult time to run an agency, which is what I was doing in 2008. And now with the tariffs and everything else that's going on in the markets, like I haven't checked the recent numbers from today, but it's probably not looking good. You might be worrying about your job in terms of marketing. And so I think this is where being able to prove your value beyond just I make articles or I do social posts is really a critical way to ensure that you continue to prove value to the organization. Don't panic if you're like, well, I can't prove how much money I made for the company. It's less, I think, companies are a little bit smarter about this now than they were in 2008, I hope. But, again, really thinking on how can you provide value beyond just the raw numbers? How can you see where your audience is going? How can you, and I would also start to think about, how have the tariffs impacted your clients if you're client side, or how are the tariffs impacting your company if you're, because, we sell digital goods, obviously, not so much a problem for us in Canada. But certainly, if you are in a company that deals with physical goods, how are these tariffs going to impact your company? So starting, even if you're like, but I'm in marketing, I don't need to worry about that. And you sure do, because it may change, for example, the geography of the kinds of people that you work with. If the US is your major trading partner right now, well, maybe it's going to be a different country going forward, for example. And so if your focus has been entirely on getting your eyeballs in front of a US audience, maybe you need to focus on getting your eyeballs in front of a different country audience, for example. So I think that that's where, as a marketer, really starting to think ahead, and seeing what's happening in the news and paying attention to it, and then also seeing like how is this possibly going to impact me as a marketer, again, is a great way to make sure you keep your job when jobs are getting cut. Rufus has decided to say hi again. Come on.
See, he knows when we cover in really important part, right?
Yep,
Uh,
get out of here,
the,
buddy.
yes, Dana, I think you captured very well in here the feelings of many marketers
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. And I
Yep.
love your tips. I love everything that you mentioned in here. Very, very specific, very practical. Thank you very much, Dana. I wish we had more time to cover this even more, but I think there's a lot of things that here hopefully marketers can take away
Yep.
to once again think about proving, think about demonstrating the impact, but also thinking beyond this. Yes, like what sort of
Mm-hmm.
insights we can provide in terms of, like you were saying, our audience, their behaviors, the trends that are happening that benefit the business and the business growth and the way um, and the way, for example, our go-to-market strategy is shaped, like you've just mentioned as well. Thinking of different locations, etc., potentially to target. Thank you
Yep.
so much, Dana. If there's anyone in here who is on this LinkedIn Live today who doesn't know where to follow you, which one is the best platform to learn more from you?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely most active on LinkedIn for sure. I have a LinkedIn newsletter that comes out every week, your digital marketing playbook, which you can subscribe to by going to my page. And I would say the other thing too is I also have a newsletter called the Kickpoint Playbook Huddle. Get it? Playbook Huddle Sports. We really like American football at Kickpoint. And so I would say subscribe to that. You can go to kpplaybook.com/newsletter. I just put out a newsletter today that actually has a tip in there about the difference between the Google tag and Google Tag Manager. So if you are deeply confused about that, which is fair, it's confusing, and you wouldn't get today's newsletter, just DM me on LinkedIn and I can send you a link to that as well. So yeah, I would say subscribe to either of those. I definitely try to share tips and GA4 changes when they come out, along with new ways to track stuff. I try to do a mix of like really practical, here's how to track AI overviews, and also big thinky pieces like what are we going to do when we present to management. And I also have a course coming out at the end of this month that will show you how to do a GA4 audit. So for those of you who need to start auditing your GA4s, start thinking about that. And agency side, this is a great way to get in with a client with something relatively inexpensive like doing a GA4 audit.
Fantastic. I'll be the first one to sign up for this. Thank you very much,
Excellent.
Dana. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for your time and thank you very much for joining us on this show.
Thank you.